So, Amy, it's great to meet you. Thank you for taking a minute out today. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
You bet. So, your topic is it's so fascinating. But before we get into it, I want to know one of the more momentous things that we all had to survive recently was the pandemic, and I know we're getting
Mm.
tired of talking about it. How did you get through it, and how has it changed the way that your work has transformed? Has it affected the way that you do things now?
I really hate saying this because I feel for all of the people that had a rough time. The pandemic was fantastic for me. Not, I mean, yes, I have all the same problems that everyone else does with, the economy went a little crazy and when my children went back to school, they were all nuts.
Yeah.
But in terms of my work, I actually had because I primarily work online these days. My work kind of blossomed. There are far more opportunities. I have far more opportunities globally without having to get on an airplane,
Yeah.
which is better for my health and better for the planet. I mean, I love traveling and I love seeing things, but like I once went for a speaking engagement, I went to Jordan for 2 days,
Wow.
like the nation of.
Yeah.
So, that's crazy and it's
Yeah.
not good for you. And so it's kind of been wonderful because technology has blossomed in some really interesting ways, and I have opportunities I never ever would have before.
So typically, to get to the essence of what you do for a living, I'll ask you to get in front of third graders. But probably we should up that bar a little bit. Maybe we should say, you're in front of a college classroom and it's career day and the kids are still trying to figure out what they're trying to do with their lives and they're
Mhm.
curious about what you do. How would you explain what you do on a daily basis?
When I speak, and I have spoken a lot to like culinary students, and I will talk about more than anything, I'll focus on being an author and a cookbook author and a representative of my niche in my field and how I chose that and why it's important to really focus on the area that you have a passion for and really pursue that rather than it's very hard to be a generalist, as a particularly like as a cookbook author or as an author
Yeah.
um, and speaker. And so I found sort of what I connect with and ran with it.
Yeah. So what did you want to be when you were a child? What was your dream to grow up and become?
So I either wanted to be a princess with an alligator in my moat,
Okay.
or a ballerina.
Okay.
And the ballerina dream faded probably around age 19. And when I had like I just couldn't stand my bad hips any longer and was like, forget it, this is not fun.
Yeah.
So although it transpired, it morphed from ballerina to modern dancer because I was realistic about my abilities. But yeah.
Sure. Yeah, my stepdaughter's she's young. She's 18 now, but a few years ago started getting these weird joint pains, and I had no
Mm,
idea that was a part of the hardcore dancing world.
yeah, it
Wow.
is. Yeah.
Yeah. So take me back to your childhood. Where were you born and raised, and how did this career evolve and become who you are today? What were the foundational seeds and elements that ultimately became who you are?
I mean, I don't think there were any seeds or elements in where I grew up. I grew up in Western Pennsylvania.
Okay.
And the only influences that of my childhood that would have been from my community were the fact that my family, we were publishers. We were small town newspaper publishers. And so I was exposed to publishing and that business from a very young age. And, as soon as we could get work permits, we had to work for the business and that kind of thing. And then my parents really loved to travel, and their focus when they traveled was food. They would pick destinations by either the restaurants or the kind of cuisine, or that was a huge focus for them, was like trying food and learning about food. I grew up in a very small town, so there wasn't a lot of variety of food. I don't think there was a Chinese restaurant till I was in college.
Yeah.
So it was that was the only way that I was exposed. They took me to San Francisco and took me to Chinatown, and that's where I learned what dim sum was. That was big.
So, talk to me a little bit about who's been an inspiration or a hero for you on this journey in your life.
Ooh. Um, gosh, an inspiration or a hero. So I've had some really interesting mentors. One jumps to mind. His name was Dr. Max Lake, and he was a I think he was a gynecologist. I never know what because I knew him as a vintner. He was Australian. He made wine in Australia's Hunter Valley, but he also professionally was a physician and I think a gynecologist. But he did a lot of research. He was fascinated by scent. And he did a lot of study on scent and scents that potentially replicated human pheromones, scents that were potentially arousing, scents that could spark more romance. It was really fascinating research, and he really inspired me to think more about aphrodisiacs as something, either folklore or something nutritionally that, maybe there are other things we could be thinking about. So he was one, definitely,
Yeah.
and a great one.
So let me ask you this. What was the first time that you had a food or a notion that this was going to be something that was going to become a focal point for your life?
Oh my gosh, I really did. This was not something I ever considered. My first job in the food and wine business was working in the tasting room of a winery. And it was a job I took right after college because it seemed like a fun choice of job, frankly.
Yeah.
And I learned a lot about wine and I really loved it. And I had the opportunity to go on to become a wine writer, a wine critic, even a wine competition judge. And that's where my passion was. And it was at a point where I had to diversify that I really started looking at aphrodisiacs. I wanted to find something that interested me and challenged me and was different.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I found it.
The one thing probably for most lay people is they don't understand what would be an aphrodisiac for food. I mean, I
Mm.
think there may be a pedestrian knowledge, but at the end of the day, what are some top foods that are a part of that list?
Well, I always go with oysters because we
Okay.
hear it all the time, right? And we assume it's just a joke or a cliche or, but oysters actually, they may potentially, was a study that gave an indication, and there's not been enough follow-up to be able to say it's true, but they could potentially raise sexual hormone levels, which is pretty
Okay.
wild. But
Yeah.
beyond that, they're a great source of zinc, which is essential for blood flow. And they're also a good source of protein, reasonably easily digestible source of protein. And some of what I talk about is just basic nutrition, right? You need protein for the energy to have sex.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, how did this begin? Talk to me a little bit about how this career began and what
Okay.
were the growing pains and how did you get to a comfort level of conveying this to people and really feeling like this was your calling in life?
So I actually, when I was in my early 20s, I got really sick and it took a long time to diagnose it. And while I was being diagnosed, I was losing more and more weight and I had less energy and I was miserable. And finally found a doctor who figured out that it was a combination of a systemic yeast infection, which is like the least sexy thing,
Yeah.
but
Right.
and a really bad mold allergy.
Wow.
And the treatment for both is primarily diet based, and they both have really restrictive diets. So when you combine the two, there's like almost nothing you can eat.
Yeah.
And it's horrible. But I stuck to it, and even within days, I started to feel better. And it was profound, to discover that this impact of what I'm putting into my body, as simple as, cutting out things like vinegar and eggs and sugar for a few weeks,
Yeah.
could heal me. It was for something that I'd suffered for months with.
Yeah.
It was really amazing. And so I knew, I was writing about wine at the time, and that was absolutely my passion. But I knew that when it was time to find other things to write about, I really wanted to find a way to get this information out, to inspire other people to make good food choices and see what a profound effect it can have. And that was part of the reason I chose sex, because I
Yeah.
figured,
Yeah.
well, That's what's going to entice people to eat well more than, hey, you're going to have great sex.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me ask you this. What is the motivation for you every day to do this work, to help people enhance their lives, and to also evolve as a human and in the work that you're doing? What is that collective energy every day for you?
Um, you know, it's exciting partly because I have this new program where for the first time ever, I'm working one-on-one
Yeah.
with people. And so I get to see the impact because sometimes, as a cookbook author and a speaker and sending out my newsletter, I often don't hear from people and find out the impact. But when I'm working one-on-one, it's like, wow, this is exciting. It helps get me out of bed each day.
Yeah.
Um, and beyond that, so I'm also a mom, and so I have to have a lot of mom energy too,
Yes.
right? So there's this weird balance, but I think anyone who's ever parented understands you just have to find, the balance between feeding your soul and feeding your children.
Yeah, for sure you do. So, what was one of the first early compliments from a client or someone that got your cookbook that really was awesome, that just made you feel more in tune with what you were doing?
Oh my goodness. So I still remember the day the first person bought my first cookbook, a Fork Me, Spoon Me. And it was a woman living in Australia.
Wow.
And she wanted to have it shipped to Australia. And she was just so excited. And just to know that, like, people were hearing me in Australia and wanted to pay the shipping to have my book before it had ever been reviewed,
Yeah,
it was exciting.
that's awesome. So, let me ask you this. If you had a dream tonight, you ran into a much younger version of you before you picked this career path, and you could give that young version of you a piece of advice based on this life you've led, the wisdom you've gained along the way, what advice would you impart on that young version of you?
Um, I've been doing a lot of restructuring of my business recently, and I would tell the younger version of me to not be afraid to do that sooner. Um, yeah, if that
Yeah,
makes sense.
it
I
totally
was
makes sense.
afraid, I was afraid of change.
Yeah,
And even when I was very stuck, I was like, no, no, this is how you do it. This is how I do it. This is how I've been told to do it. Yeah.
yeah. So let me ask you this. There's a lot of people out there. I mean, food and sex and drinking and all these things are just a part of what we do as the human condition.
Right.
But for those out there that want to up the ante and they really want to reach out and get your cookbook or they want
Mhm.
to reach out to you, what would you say to urge them to do that? Where do you think people need to be? What's your clientele? How do people finally decide this is it? This is where I want to go?
Well, a lot of people find me or used to through live speaking engagements and book signings, and those kind of things. But since the pandemic, I've put so much more energy into my website, Eat Something Sexy.
Yeah.
And I put a lot of energy into my mailing list and reaching out to those people directly. And so absolutely, if you want to know more or find me or learn about my books, go to eatsomething.sexy.com. Definitely sign up for my mailing list because they get all the exciting offers. I'm not working with anyone one-on-one who isn't on that list, for example. So that's the best way. And also when you're there, when you go to eatsomething.sexy.com, you'll realize I have so many free resources for you,
Yeah.
like so many.
So, I mean, is this for a lot of your clients and the feedback that you've gotten from people for your cookbook, is this a real revelatory world that they just didn't even know existed?
Um, so I kind of hang with people in the food world,
Yeah.
and so they all always want to, commingle romance, sex, food, right? So
Yeah.
for them, it was normal.
Yeah.
Um, and it was an adjustment for me to kind of figure out how to reach the rest of the population because it may not necessarily be so normal. But I do think people recognize, like, I mean, look, Valentine's Day is the most popular day in restaurants. Like,
Yeah.
you do associate, we're going to go have this dinner together and then we're going to go home and have sex, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and there is some awareness. But yeah, it's been a little bit of a learning curve figuring out how to make it seem normal. What's obvious to me isn't obvious to everyone.
Yeah. Well, and LA is such a progressive place. I mean, that
Hmm.
seems like the ideal clientele. But are you seeing a lot of people from maybe like here in Kansas City in our area that's
Mhm.
Midwest? Are you seeing a lot of this kind of go out into areas that you wouldn't expect would be a popular region?
I do, maybe not necessarily as much. Definitely in, more like city centers or more. So Chicago, so for the Midwest, the Chicago area
Yeah.
is where my books will sell. That's where I get asked to speak. It's definitely a little bit more. And also I'm much more popular in other countries.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm big in Britain. As I said, I've been invited to speak in Jordan. I'm big in Australia.
Okay.
I'm not big, like I'm not a celebrity, but it's just like I find a lot of my
Sure.
audience in other countries.
Sure. It's
Yeah.
interesting how that makes total sense to me that it would
Yeah.
be big overseas.
Mhm.
So, of all of these things that you've done and accomplished in your life up to this point, what are you the proudest of?
Oh my gosh. Honestly, my children, let's
Yeah.
face it. Like,
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah. How about professionally? Is there a
Mhm.
milestone? Is there a place that is precious to you?
Well, there's a day that I will never forget. I was asked to do a speaking engagement for the Santa Barbara Natural History Museum. And it was nice. I was excited because it was going to be a little large audience. It was their full auditorium. I was going to be on stage. They set up a kitchen for me. And I was like, this is really nice.
Yeah.
And then they told me I would be introduced by John Cleese,
Wow.
right? Who created Monty Python. Right.
Uh-huh.
Yes. Yes. So John Cleese, Pink Panther, was going to introduce me. And then they said, and if you want, he'll be your sous chef.
Wow.
And I was like, yeah, yeah.
Are you kidding?
And I was terrified that, he was going to steal the show because so I was thinking this and he clearly knew I was thinking this because he sat me down and he said to me, right off the bat, I want you to be mean to me. People will love it. And I was like, okay, going to be mean to John Cleese, going to be mean to John Cleese. We go out on stage and I'm thinking, how am I going to be mean to John Cleese?
Yeah.
And we had a conversation. Oh, I know. I was preparing my ingredients, and while I was explaining my ingredients, he informed everyone that he's lactose intolerant. And then he did something wrong, and so I looked at him. And I said, "Somebody give this man a glass of milk." And everyone cracked up as he promised they would. And the look in his eyes, like that moment, I earned John Cleese's respect, and I
That's
was
so
like,
good.
this is the best moment of my career.
That's awesome. That
Yeah.
is so cool.
Yeah.
So, so at the end of the day, everyone sees you in a different light. Family, friends, everyone that you speak to, everyone that buys your book. But at the end of the day, you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Oh gosh. Um, I am just a hardworking momtrepreneur,
Yeah.
I am that thing that we are all women. I know so many women now who want to be independent of a traditional 9 to 5. But yeah, I am that fighting spirit. I am that mom who is also running her own business. And it's hard.
Yeah. Yeah. So I got to know, what is your favorite aphrodisiac food? What is on your top list of foods,
Okay, well, you can't go wrong with dark chocolate.
right?
I say that, but then I have to go, well, unless you don't like dark chocolate, then don't eat dark chocolate, right?
Yeah.
For me, a glass of champagne is just perfect. But as I mentioned, wine is my passion.
Yeah.
Other aphrodisiacs that I think work really well, both ginger and chilies are great. They excite the body, right? They warm you up.
Yeah.
And so I love both of those. I'm very sensitive to heat of chili, but a little bit is an amazing aphrodisiac. Ginger can do the same thing, only it's a little more subtle. So those are some good ones.
Yeah, well, I'm curious, how is sushi rank up there? Because you got the
Mhm.
ginger, you got the wasabi, you got the
Right?
fish. Seems like you got the proteins, you got all of the
Yep.
like the oyster with the fish. So is that a good
Yeah.
one?
Sushi's great. In fact, I'm often asked what to do if you want to have a romantic evening at home. And one of my best suggestions is try making sushi together. It may not look perfect. You
Yeah.
know, the rice might not come out right, but it's a great activity. It's sexy food. It is all aphrodisiacs. You really can't go wrong.
Yeah. So as someone that's been on stages, that's given speeches, and you talked about John Cleese, what is the best speech you've ever witnessed?
Oh my goodness. I don't know.
Okay.
Wow. What's the best speech you've ever witnessed? I can't even
I
think of.
I saw Bill Clinton in 2005 come to the Harry S. Truman Museum, and it was unbelievable. He came through those doors, and every piece of energy particle
Mm,
totally changed. I still
mm.
remember what he talked about. He was talking about solar panels on high rises in New York, harnessing the energy revolution that was starting to happen at the time. And just his vernacular and the way that he approaches just speaking to human beings
Mm.
is just unbelievable.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So that was, but anyway, I just wanted to throw it out because you've been on so many stages and you've done this
Right.
so often. So if anyone wants to pick up your cookbook, if they want to
Mhm.
hire you, if they want any of the good business, your newsletter, how do they go about doing that?
So visit eatsomething.sexy.com. You can sign up to my mailing list from any page on the site. You can also you can contact me through the contact us on the site. If you want to check out my cookbooks, there are on Amazon. You can view excerpts. You don't necessarily have to buy from Amazon because I know some people don't want to these days. You can order any of my cookbooks, special order them from any independent bookseller. But if you want to look at them, Amazon's a great place to do it. So
Okay. Excellent. Amy, this has been wonderful. Thank you. It's been so
thank you.
illuminating. I appreciate your time.
Of course. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care.